Everything began when the mutineers, fleeing from British justice, abandoned the ship called Bounty and set foot on this island, dreaming of making it a refuge. Pitcairn would, after this escape, witness a chain of events shadowed by alcoholic leaders and bloody massacres. The Polynesian communities, erased from history, arrived on this island around the 11th century and established a settlement. Together with the animals they brought, they continued their cycle of life here. Pitcairn's reserves of obsidian and fine stone were valuable. While the islanders lived peacefully in this piece of paradise, they made use of the minerals they extracted by trading them with the people of Angara Island, located 500 kilometers away. Indeed, just by glancing at the map, it becomes clear that this is one of the most difficult islands in the world to reach. When they first arrived, they rejoiced as if they had discovered an oasis. Most likely, they made use of everything the island offered. They mined, raised animals, planted crops, and within this prosperity, they continued to live for about 400 years. But after those 4 centuries had passed, resources began to run out, and frictions arose with Mangara, the only place where trade ties remained. When there was nothing left to sell, scarcity was gradually felt. Driven by the anger of poverty, internal conflicts erupted on this small island. When the first blood was shed, the end was near, and the Polynesians, under the weight of both famine and the lack of a place to escape, slowly disappeared. In the end, no one remained on the island. Silence fell. Centuries later, when the calendar showed 1787, Britain sent the Bounty to the Pacific to find and transport breadfruit seedlings. The administration, seeking practical ways to feed various communities in the Caribbean, wanted to transport crops that were familiar to the locals and easy to cultivate. This voyage's crew aimed to collect breadfruit trees or seeds for the West Indies and to grow them in their colonies as an alternative to hunger. They set out, sailed around the islands, but when they reached Tahiti, the crew, accustomed to the harshness of sea life, were met with an unexpected hospitality. Stunned by the tropical climate, abundant food, and the attention of women, most sailors did not want to leave. They lived a comfortable life in Tahiti for more than 6 months. Duty awaited, they had to go. But no one wanted to return to the seas. Those who did not dare to mutiny, reluctantly went back to the ship and set course again. But once a wolf tastes blood, it never holds back. The taste of the island's abundance made this exhausting sea life unbearable, and the flag of mutiny was raised. The first move against the ship's commander, Lieutenant William Bligh, was made by another lieutenant, Fletcher Christian. Those who gathered around him forced the 18 men who remained with the captain into a boat and left them to deserted waters while they set course back to the island. The rebellion was successful. Meanwhile, Bligh and the 18 sailors loyal to him undertook an unbelievable rowing journey of nearly 6,500 kilometers with a boat and managed to reach land, beginning to plan revenge. Christian and his crew, however, returned to Tahiti, their own paradise, and enjoyed carefree days again, unaware that Bligh had survived and was preparing to strike back. The captain, upon reaching land, reported the situation to the government, then set sail again to capture the mutineers. The first stop was, of course, Tahiti, the place the sailors had been unwilling to leave. And there, some of the mutineers were caught and sent to execution. Upon hearing this news, Christian, along with a few crew members who had managed to escape the captain's wrath, some Tahitian women and a few men, left the island behind. They chose Pitcairn, known for its silence in history, as their new refuge. Once they arrived, they unloaded the ship and carried its parts ashore, and on January 23, 1790, they burned the Bounty to ashes, thus making it nearly impossible to trace them. Moreover, the island was difficult to find because it had been mistakenly recorded east of its true location. In 1790, things quickly went downhill, including Christian, 9 European sailors, 12 Tahitian women brought as slaves, and 6 men, a community of 27 people was formed. 9 of the women were assigned among the 9 sailors, while the remaining 3 women were shared, in turn, among the 6 native men. Inequality kept the seeds of resentment alive. In other words, while each sailor had a wife, among the native men, it was 2 men to 1 woman. This injustice was already creating unrest. Pitcairn had fertile soil, fresh water, and a mild climate. But soon, alcohol became the greatest trouble. Those who learned to brew liquor from the roots of the tea plant completely disrupted the balance. When McCoy from the crew learned to distill from the island's tea roots, Christian more or less stepped aside and turned to enjoying island life. In practice, leadership fell into McCoy's hands, and he himself could not stay away from the liquor he produced. His so-called leadership consisted of wandering around drunk and passing the time with the woman he was with. One day, McCoy drank too much and had a fit of rage. Because he failed to catch fish, he punished the woman slave he kept by cutting off her ear. Already exhausted by the miserable life, the woman, after this incident, threw herself from a cliff and committed suicide. The alcoholic leader McCoy, having lost his wife among the already scarce women on the island, was left alone. But this did not stop him. He set his eyes on the 3 women shared by the 6 native men. The wording is disturbing, but it was the raw truth of that era. In short, in this arrangement where 2 men had to share 1 woman, the men were already unhappy and resentful. McCoy's desire for one of these women lit the fuse. When the Tahitian men managed to steal rifles and ammunition from the sailors, they killed most of the European sailors within hours. Of course, the women and children survived. Out of the 9 sailors, only 4, Adams, Young, Quintal, and McCoy, were left alive. The remaining women and children had not been involved in the violence. But the reckoning was not over. The rebellion started by the enslaved men was not about protecting their fellow women. In fact, they wanted control over all of the women. Knowing this, the local women took advantage of the chaos and killed 6 of the native men in their sleep at night, shifting the balance of power once again. These native men had treated the women even more brutally than the Europeans did. The women were simply striking back. Now there were 11 native women and 4 European sailors left on the island. Among those 4 men, apart from the chronically alcoholic McCoy, the others were not excessively cruel. While McCoy wandered in search of drink, Quintal roamed in isolation, and Adams and Young, remorseful for their deeds, turned to prayer and the Bible, devoting themselves to religion. But the withdrawn Quintal eventually broke out of his shell and began harassing the women. One day he completely lost control, started causing physical harm, and even threatened to hurt the children. Declaring that such behavior is unacceptable both religiously and morally, Young and Adams executed him one night. After that, for reasons never fully understood, McCoy took his own life. The atmosphere grew even stranger. Soon after, the devout Young, worn down by trauma and illness, also passed away. This piece of land that looked like paradise was becoming a grave for one after another. Adams was left as the only surviving man. He rose to the position of both the island's leader and a kind of spiritual figure, establishing households with the 11 women around him. Although different possibilities have been suggested about Young's death, little is certain. As months and years went by, Adams formed unions with all the women, delivered religious sermons, and began to see himself as a kind of Messiah sent to the island. His aim was to build a Christian community. He had all the plants used for alcohol production destroyed. Over the years, children were born from these unions, and the island's population began to grow with Adams's lineage. Decades later, as the community grew into a deeply religious congregation, Pitcairn became almost like a fortress of faith. In 1808, when the American ship Topaz arrived, they found a charismatic leader of high standing and a well-ordered community. That leader was the last surviving mutineer, John Adams, who for years had gone by the name Alexander Smith. The scene looked like this. Visitors were impressed to see a Christian order in the middle of the ocean, but the dark side of the past was little known. As visits increased, order began to falter. When Adams grew old, a change in leadership became inevitable. In the mid-19th century, one rising figure was George Hun Nobbs. For a brief period, however, authority was seized by a fraud named Joshua Hill, who claimed to have been appointed by the crown. George died. Afterward, Hill emerged, building himself a palace and indulging in luxury. But a few years later, with the arrival of a British warship, Hill was exposed as nothing more than an impostor and was expelled from the island. As the century neared its end, a representative of the Seventh-day Adventists arrived. In 1886, under the influence of lay missionary John I. Tay, most of the community shifted from Anglicanism to Adventism. By 1890, baptisms were carried out with the arrival of a missionary ship. The complete prohibition of alcohol also took root in this period. As the years passed, under Queen Victoria's reign, the community's existence was officially recognized. The island gained status as part of the Pitcairn Islands group. Pitcairn, Henderson, Ducie, and Eno, considered Britain's only overseas territory in the Pacific. The capital was Adamstown. As the population grew, part of it was resettled on other islands. In the 1900s, the interest of both governments and curious travelers increased. Despite the passing years, the island's ill fate did not change. By 2004, the population was around 60. About a third of the men, including Mayor Steve Christian, were tried on 55 charges, including sexual crimes against children, and 6 defendants were convicted. Former Magistrate Jay Warren was acquitted. Following the convictions, a prison was built for the island. Although some served sentences under house arrest, the punishments were carried out. The next mayor from the same community, Mike Warren, was charged in 2010 with possession of child pornography, and in 2016 was found guilty on thousands of offenses based on image downloads. In short, most of these people were born and raised on the island. Within such a small community, moral decay had accumulated over generations. In 2019, the island's first female mayor, Charlene Warren Poo, took office. In 2022, she was succeeded by Simon Young. According to the latest counts, around 50 people live on the island. Most bloodlines still trace back to Adams and Christian. Hopefully, in the future, a healthier social order will be built for the people living here. And for those who plan to visit, it's worth thinking twice. Thanks for watching. If you liked the video, don't forget to like it and subscribe to the channel. See you in the next video.